Good afternoon, everyone. So we are here for the section 4K, African Epistemologies and Decolonialities. Celebrating Oyeronke in part 1. So although we are going to start in 5 minutes, but I would like to verify from those online the audio check. So can you hear? So let's say something to verify that. Mark, can you hear me, Mark?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, I can hear you.
So I'm going to hand over to the chairperson. You can start the section.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me, please? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this panel titled African Epistemologies and Decolonialities. And this is a panel. It's part of one of the panels celebrates Oyewumi, Oyewumi. And my name is Oyeronke Ashaju, and I teach African and World History at Governor State University. And I am deeply honored and also personally delighted to get this panel. And so today, we come together to honor the remarkable scholarship of Professor Oyeronke Oyewumi, whose revolutionary work as redefined of gender theory, African studies, and also decolonial thoughts. And so with a bold intellectual vision and steadfast commitments to challenging the Eurocentric frameworks, she has laid a foundation that continues to shape and also inspire critical scholarship across disciplines. And she is well known for her groundwork, her groundbreaking, or let me say revolutionary book, that's The Invention of Women, in an African sense of Western gender discourses, which was published in 1997. And this text continues to challenge how we think about gender, how we think about identity, as well as the universality of Western feminists. And on a personal note, I mean, she's also authored and also co-edited quite a number of books, which most of our panelists, will touch on, in the course of their presentation. But on a personal note, I mean, our work, that's The Invention of Women, was one of the most formative texts that I read while I was developing my own PhD research on gender and marriage in colonial southwestern Nigeria. And more specifically, our insistence on, calling our attention to paying close attention to language, kinship, as well as social organization, also forced me to think critically about how colonial as well as academic discourses, how they have reimagined African lives. So this panel is, like I mentioned earlier, part of the broader, panel, set up to celebrate our work. And so without taking much time, I would want each of the panelists to speak for 10 minutes. So we have, 2 minutes up, I would let you know, and then when it's time for you to wrap up your thoughts, I'll also signify to you. So we're going to start with, and each presenter will speak for 10 minutes so we can have enough time at the end, for questions and discussion, and will help keep us on time so that we'll have enough time to allow for rich engagements with the audience. So we're going to begin this paper, which is Oyeronke Dominion Adigun from Thai Sholari University of Education.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Oyeronke Adigun from Thai Sholari University of Education. So the title of my paper is Breaking Barriers and Forging Paths, Women Journalists in Lagos State. Basically, what this paper wants to explore is to examine the contribution of this women in Lagos State judiciary. When we take this when I come back to the past, to the pre-colonial times, to the colonial times, and also the post-colonial times. In the pre-colonial times, there is no doubt women were part of the judicial process. They were part of the traditional judicial process, but basically they were involved in cases that directly affected women themselves and their children. For example, we have Council of Elders in Lagos State, for example. We call them SNESIN. These are Council of female elders that adjudicated cases in the pre-colonial times. Also, when we move to the southeastern part of Nigeria, we also have the Nkantiano among the Libyans and the Efik. This is just to establish the fact that in the pre-colonial times, women were part of the judicial process in the pre-colonial times. But coming with the British legal system, this actually relegated the women to the secondary level because this came with the introduction of the official judiciary. So what really happened was that these women had to struggle their way back into the different judicial positions. So regardless of the struggle, regardless of the barrier, these women were still able to make headway into the different judicial positions that they occupy today. Now going back to my place of focus, that is Lagos State. The first woman to be appointed in the Lagos State Judiciary was appointed in 1995, and that was Honorable Justice Roselyn Omotosho. That was the first woman that was appointed in Lagos State Judiciary. But Lagos State Judiciary is so amazing among all the judiciaries in Nigeria. Of course, Lagos State Judiciary happened to be the oldest judiciary and also the first judiciary that was established. A lot of historical accounts were attached to that. But Lagos State Judiciary is super different from every other judiciary because we have the issue or the tradition of female dominance. I'll be corrected not to say female dominance. Maybe let me say female headship. They have more of female judges in the Lagos State Judiciary. Like I said the first woman was appointed in 1995. So the present chief judge is a male chief judge, and that was the appointment that broke the tradition of female dominance and the top echelon when it comes to leadership in the Lagos State Judiciary. So, of course, what are the objectives of the study? Number one objective is to look at the early history of Lagos State briefly in relation or in regards to the traditional judicial system, and also to examine the origin of the British colonial judicial system. Because when we talk about judiciary in Nigeria and also in Lagos, it started from Lagos State, and that was when Lagos State was succeeded to the British government, and that was when the judiciary started. But when the judiciary started, then it didn't start as Lagos State Judiciary; it started as the colonial province judiciary. So the women have to struggle their way back into the what we call judicial position, like I said. And when we talk about the presence of the representation of women in judiciary generally in Nigeria and also all over the world, it happened to all the countries at different times. For example, in the United States, the first woman that was appointed as the chief judge of the United States was Esther Morris, and that came into existence in 1870. That was the time the first woman was appointed. The reason why I'm pointing at this women is that no matter the hindrances, the challenges as women, we are still meant to try. That is why the title is breaking the barrier, no matter the limitation, the cultural and the social barriers that are there. We know the culture of patriarchy is there, but we can still forge ahead. We can still think about the way forward. So, and also when we moved to the New Zealand in 1893, the first woman that was first appointed then was Mary Anderson, and also in the United Kingdom, Dr. Elizabeth Lane, and the first woman that was appointed in Nigeria generally after Nigeria gained independence, because I told you that the legal system of the British came with the fact that the women were relegated to the settled people. So they have to fight their way back into the different judicial positions that they occupy today. But this is not still balanced. Because when we look at the different presidents or the justice of even the Supreme Court of Nigeria, as far as when the Supreme Court of Nigeria has been created, we have only 2 women that have become the chief judge of the Supreme Court of Nigeria. The present chief judge is a woman. That should be the second woman that was appointed. So now I want to move. Okay, for the objective, like I said, discuss the origin of the British colonial judicial system in Lagos up to when Lagos State was created, and even when Lagos State was created, that was also when the courts that were available in Lagos State judiciary then in 1967, that is the magistrate court and the high court. That was when these 2 courts were made together to become the Lagos State judiciary, and that is why it's also important to look into that. Also, I like the major development in the judicial system since the creation of Lagos State. A lot of developments have been in place in Lagos State coming with the women. For example, we have some of the problems that affect judiciary in Nigeria. We have corruption, we have delay in dispensing justice, we also have lack of financial autonomy. Talking about how to look into the problem of delayed injustice. In Lagos State Judiciary, coming with Honorable Oyewumi in 2017 and 18, 23,900 cases were being disposed from the both High Court and also the Magistrate Court. So these are the amazing things that these women have done. So these women have also invented or introduced a new form that is e-filing. You don't have to go to Lagos State Judiciary and lodge your complaint or give your case to them. You just have to do it online, and we have made that easy for the people of Lagos State. So that is what I would say about their contribution, because I have limited time. I have a lot of things to cover. I have to put everything together. Thank you so much for this.
Yeah, thank you. Hello, the team on ground. Please, can we have a view of the whole setup, especially for those present, for those of us online, because it gives, it helps us connect to the space as well as the vibe on ground. But now what we only see is blank screen.
Okay, Mark, I apologize for that, because we have technical issues. We have technical issues, so that's why it's not
Oh, okay.
Can you
Thank you.
let her
Okay, so
know that Professor Oyewumi is here? I don't think she does.
all right, and Professor Oyewumi, she's coming, like she's here.
okay. Okay, so I'm actually struggling to hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's better now.
Can you hear me now? So I said
Yes.
that we have technical issues. So the camera might not work. So you might not be able to have the general overview of the participant. And also, Professor Oyewumi will get present at the
But can they see us?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, perfect. Okay. Yeah.
So I apologize for that.
Oh, it's fine. It's fine. Okay, so let's move on to our second presenter, Ada Akonde from University of Calabar.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Actually, I am not Akonde. It's just the same spelling with Yoruba. Yeah, I just have the same spelling. Okay, Yeah,
How do you say it?
it's pronounced as Akande.
My
Uh,
apologies.
I actually get that a lot because the Yoruba. Okay, thank you so much for present my work. So basically, my work explores the indigenous people of Biafra movement in Southeast Nigeria. So I'm trying to question the idea of visible and invisible labor within the context of the movement. So basically, the group was formed in 2012 to agitate for the marginalization of the Igbo people in Southeast Nigeria. So over the years that the group has been operational, we've had literature, scholarships that have interrogated the dynamics of the group. However, there's really been absence of that explores the gender dynamics of the group in terms of exploring how women are engaging with this group, how they make meaning of the group, and how they understand the concept of secessionism within the context of IPOP movement. So basically, over the past 2 years, I've been trying to interrogate this question about how women are engaged in IPOP and what they are really doing within the movement. So basically, I've been able to conduct field work for the past 2 years, and based on my field work findings, the research actually revealed that women have really been engaged in IPOP movements. They've been engaged in trying to decolonize the space, IPOP space. They've been engaged in some form of spiritual work also within the group. But however, one very critical thing about their engagement is that the things they do, the contribution are not recognized as forms of political participation. So basically, based on the interactions I had with some of my interlocutors, women's work are basically described as women's work, not really as forms of political engagement. So I try to engage with Professor Oyeronke within the context of African scholarships. So the basic arguments I do within my research is to say that the reason why women's is because most of the epistemological framings that we have regarding political participation is more or less anchored around Eurocentric frameworks, in the sense that how we define politics does not take cognizance of the way it's recognized within the context of African. So basically, I'm trying to argue within the context of my work that in order for us to really appreciate what women are doing within the IPOP space, or to know exactly how women are engaging with IPOP group, we need to decolonize our understanding of politics. So beyond defining politics as maybe occupying political positions, holding leadership positions, or giving speeches, there are other African or African decolonial frameworks that gives us an analogy about how we can understand politics. So beyond us saying that politics is authoritative allocation of scarce resources or values within the society, there are other informal everyday activities that shape how IPOP actually engages, and that is where we find women. So my scholarship is basically trying to engage with Professor Oyeronke's work to say that we need to go beyond the Eurocentric understanding of political participation to embrace our pre-colonial understanding of what political participation is. Based on that, we will be able to understand better how women are engaging within the secessionist politics in Southeast Nigeria. Thank you very much.
Thank you for keeping to time. Yeah. So let's move on to the third panelist, Taiwo Akindutsi from Osun State University.
Thank you very much. The title of my paper is Exploring Selected Yoruba Proverbs in Corroboration of Oyewumi's Explication of Nature Phrases in the Invention of Women. Oyewumi has made immense and impactful contributions to scholarly writings on African studies across academic fields, with critical focus on gender studies and feminist discourse. In her varied studies, she has explicitly expounded the need for African gender studies
the need for African gender scholars to prioritize the constitution of genealogy of their own objects of study, rather than using the lens of the European or Eurocentric critics to explain or interpret their cultural values. She is of the opinion that African scholars should be intentional about non-deployment of Western ideologies to study or evaluate African beliefs that deserve to be studied on their own terms. In this study, theoretical insights are drawn from Oyewumi's perspective, and with the use of qualitative research design, the study extracted selected Yoruba proverbs from the Yoruba folklore and literary texts to explicate the metaphor of such nature phrases as Omo Iya, Oko Iya, and Iya Baba, to further unveil the layer of interpretations that can be given these locutions. The study, okay, let me move to the introduction. Oyewumi's The Invention of Women discusses the epistemological peculiarities in the conception of the deployment of gender categories, both in the Yoruba culture and Western, while making reference to the invention of women in a book entitled African Gender, a Reader. She remarks that the use of gender as an analytical category in African studies is expanding. She adds that the conceptions of gender cannot be taken at their face level if we are to make sense of African cultures. Now, let me move to those first of time. The concept, but before I get to the analysis per se, I want to mention that the concept of gender as explicated by Oyewumi, West, sex and sexuality, according to the West, then here in Africa, social categories or relationships. The data, Omo Iya, the first proverb, I brought in three different proverbs. The first has it that Omo Iya ki iya, Omo Baba ni ba dira won, meaning children of the same mother do not disown each other or one another as the case may be. But children of the same father, they lie in ambush against one another, but that's not part of this study. The focus is on Omo Iya ki iya. The English translation of Omo Iya, children of the same mother, then the Yoruba, children of the same mother do not disown each other, as I earlier said. What does this mean? Well, just as the West understand this to be sons and daughters or children that issue forth from the same womb, likewise we do in Yoruba, but our own interpretation of this involves much more. It has a much deeper meaning than mere sons and daughters of the same mother. Research established among the Yoruba of southwestern Nigeria, Omo Iya contains the colon, loin, and these are a friend in need, who is regarded as a friend indeed, can be regarded as Omo Iya, an intimate neighbor, a caring colleague, a helper, a supporter, an encourager, a philanthropist, and the likes. Oyewumi 2003 remarks that the category of Omo Iya transcends gender. According to her, sometimes it is used to refer to an individual. She adds that what it encapsulates is the collectivity. Confirming the veracity, the truthfulness of Oyewumi's submission, Lawal et al. 2020 B312 says that the concept of Omoya underlines the philosophical and social significance of mother or motherhood in the Yoruba society. According to them, motherhood is not antithetical to any form of other social constructs. The second proverb has it that bí a kò bá sọ fún ọmọdé pé èèyàn lọ́kọ ìyá rẹ̀, á ní ta ni wá ń gba ẹ̀kọ́, ta ni wá ń gba ìyá òun lẹ́kọ̀ọ́ jẹ lójoojúmọ́. The English translation, according to Oyewumi, I got this from Oyewumi's collection of proverbs. Oyewumi 2005 is, if a child is not told that a certain person is its mother's husband, the child asks who this person is, who comes every day to take food from his mother. In the English interpretation of the phrase Okoya, Okoya means husband of mother. That is, he who husbands a mother. Among the Yoruba, the meaning of Okoya is quite elaborate because it refers to different categories of individuals based on the kind of relationships they have. So, Okoya, in addition to meaning the husband of mother, also means the biological sons and daughters of Iya. I can remember my mom does call me Okomi. For me, that is to say my husband, for the sake of those who do not understand Yoruba. Community boys and girls also belong to that category. Even male and female adults who Iya is old enough to give birth to are also in that category. Friends, acquaintances, neighbors, and so on. According to Oyewumi, 1997, the Yoruba category, Oko, that is husband, includes what a married woman would call husband or sister-in-law. Therefore, it is not gender specific, but denotes lineage membership. That is quoting from Oyewumi, 1997. The Yoruba category, Oko, includes. Now, in corroboration of Oyewumi's submission, in the context of the proverb that is being considered, Oko means not only the husband of one's mother or one's stepfather. It involves much more. It means somebody who is kind of a superior. Let me give an instance. If I have an altercation with somebody and the person becomes so embittered, so angry, the person may tell me point blank that that is to say, I will let you know, or I will make you realize that I am the husband of your mother. What does it purport to mean? It means I will deal with you. I will let you know I am more superior, far more superior, and the like. Now, it will mean a creditor, a disciplinarian. Importantly, it is good to make it explicit that each of these may either be a male or a female. Somebody telling me does not necessarily mean that such a person is a male. Now, the third proverb is Iya Baba Pomolobiri to Oyewumi. This is one of the proverbs I collected from the script. It's not common. Iya Baba Pomolobiri to Oyewumi. That is to say, paternal grandmother includes women other than the woman that carried one's pregnancy. In English, Iya Baba is interpreted as the mother of father or paternal grandmother. But the phrase has a deeper meaning among the Yoruba, as it refers not only to the woman that bears one father, but also to a daughter, a cherished daughter. I remember when my father was alive, he did fondly call my female siblings and I, Yemi, Yemi. The full version is Yemi, meaning my mother. Now, my husband will tell me, Yami, we call me Yami. Then I do notice him address women, girls, ladies, Yami, my mother. When responding to greetings, we will say, oh, Yami. So meaning this proverb is actually, projecting what the Yoruba actually believe. Now let me come to the conclusion. The study concludes that the philosophical ideologies on the primacy of mother as the core site of solidarity and familial relationships embedded in the Yoruba value system are inexhaustible. Thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, thank you. So let's move on to our next presenter. That's Blessing Odesomi from the University of Ibadan.
That's everyone. I want to first of all say it's a great privilege to see Professor Oyeronke for the first time. Okay, so Professor Oyeronke, I'm very honored. Because I've only been reading and watching videos of her. I've never had the opportunity to. So my paper, I want to say, the great one. So my paper is titled "Sisterhood Without Borders: African Women's Perspectives and Responses to Transnational Feminism." And sisterhood in this context is used to mean solidarity or togetherness, and transnational feminism became the framework to promote sisterhood among women who have shared different experiences, especially in terms of oppression. Now, feminism, like we had the panel yesterday, and we were saying that feminism means different people, because for some think that feminists are just there to promote themselves and just advocate for whatever they want to. But feminism actually is fighting for women's rights and for the voices of women to be heard. Okay, like I said, it's how that we use over time as an assumption that there is shared expression of oppression among women all over the world. But we have had many critiques as to how do we measure similar experiences of oppression. How can you say that every one of these women shared the same or similar forms of oppression? And according to Oyewumi and some other scholars, they have said that sisterhood cannot be assumed on the basis of gender. It must be forged in concrete historical and political practices and analysis. That is, we can't generalize the concept of sisterhood. We have to look into their history and their political practices, how they came about, tracing back how they got to that point where they are. Okay. The problem we are looking at in this paper is basically how the voices or the unique experiences of Black women have been marginalized, and then the one-sided or universalized Western perspective of transnational feminism and the global structure patriarchal system, how it has been a purely policy information and countered or even left women in what my mentor called entrapment. And we have also continued to see long-standing patterns of Western dominance on the global space. So we want to look at how African women have shaped sisterhood across borders and how they embrace continuities and how they have been able to break silences. Okay. Sisterhood normally would be like, we want to return to, you are my mother's daughter, or we are related by blood. But in this context, that it's beyond that, it goes to how people want to show that they share similar experiences. Okay, we have had critics of transnational feminism, which have mentioned some universalization of Western women's experiences when these Western feminists get to write, they will tend to want to generalize their experiences or impose Eurocentric assumptions, and people have criticized it to say that this exported framework cannot work with Africa because it will alienate the experiences of the local women. Okay, we've had other traditional critics like our own very Professor Oyeronke, Oyewumi, Ifi Amadue, who said that the evolution of Western gender categories onto African context is not is contrary to the it's contrary. Okay, and then we have also had critics like Achebe 2005 who said there have been a dismantling of indigenous social order vis-a-vis the colonial female leadership structure. Okay, now this theory basically is a blend of African feminist thought. Theoretical position is a blend of African feminist thought and intersectionality or intersectional theory, which looks at the overlapping structures, overlapping or intersecting social identity and related systems of oppression, domination, or discrimination. How race, class, and sex intersect to put women under from different forms of oppression. We also looked at feminism and Stefanism. These are African feminist perspectives that try to we used to look at how we can explain sisterhood among women. Okay, there are various feminist strategies that have been used over time. We have the Women National Coalition in South Africa, Mama Network that was used to fight for abortion right, abortion legislation rights and others. So, but for looking at the more recent perspectives of African women, we can say that sisterhood has transcended just writing, and it has moved into the digital space, where younger African feminists have begun to put themselves out there on social media whenever they have experiences of oppression and all that. We have examples of Angel Nduka, who wants to invade 2009, coined in say her name Nigeria, which she adopted from the African American feminist. I'm talking about Kimberly Crenshaw. She's actually coined the word say her name to talk about the rape of women by women of uniform in America. So she drew that content and attached the Nigeria to it, and it went viral. People all over the globe could see women standing up to actually speak for themselves. We also have others like I Stop Raping Us, Bring Back Our Girls. Now this brings to fore that if the grassroots cannot be had beyond just what people say, because the paper looks at African women's perspective, what they are saying, how they are going about advocating for their own rights. See a work in progress anyway. So based on the context of this conference, what has continued in the way African women have seen transnational feminism. We see that there has been continued struggle, continued shared struggle versus patriarchy. We have also seen that global solidarity, the clamor for global solidarity has continued. However, the methods have changed, the platforms are beginning to change, and there's now digital activism, which is an alternative space for sisterhood to be practiced and for grassroots stories to be told. I want to conclude by saying that African feminists are not they are not saying African feminists, sorry, they are not saying that, or we cannot say that what the Western views are completely irrelevant. They were like a part. Just as if I want to go this way, I want to get a particular path. I must have seen somebody who treaded the path. The person may not be following that. I may not follow that person's path directly, but I want to say that that path gave us an opportunity to see that we can actually also build or cut out a path for ourselves. Like I had Professor Oyeronke once saying that we should theorize from where we are. So I think that's one of the basic things African feminists are doing, and we should begin to rethink global feminism in a way that it puts into context our own African women lived experiences. If every African feminist should begin to engage these African paradigms, I believe that we have more transformations in the course of time. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. And we move to our final speaker for this panel, and that is Olubunmi Omotola from Olabisi Onabanjo University.
Thank you very much, Prof. I'm really honored to speak to me. My title of my paper is Historical Feminism, Key to Understanding Women's Role in Africa. So I said to start with colonialism, and I said that colonialism in Africa altered our history completely. African modes of thought, the next slide, development and way of life were significantly influenced by the changes brought about by colonialism. So different scholars examining the effects of colonial rule in African society are presented diverse perspectives on the impact of colonialism on the women. Oyewumi research on the Yoruba culture has shown that gender was constructed in Yoruba society as a result of one, the interconnected influences of colonial rule in Nigeria, the translation of Yoruba into English, and the continued dominance of Western women production. This paper examines historical feminism in women's work as a key to understanding the roles of women in Yoruba history and variation in Africa. The colonialism and the colonialities. But colonialism is not something it's a process whereby one country takes control over another country or another region. In theories of colonialism like Fanon and Albert, maybe I think that colonization led to the creation of two separate groups, the colonized side and the colonized. And the difference is not just about their blue, whether they are white, it's more, it goes beyond their physical appearances, it encompasses their attitude and belief as well. Colonialism significantly impacted knowledge production in Africa. It devalued our indigenous knowledge systems and imposed Eurocentric Western paradigms. This resulted in the marginalization of African perspectives and the distortion of knowledge production, with Western modes becoming dominant. And about described that the coloniality of knowledge, which refers to the enduring influence of colonialism on the production, valuation, and dissemination of knowledge, even after colonization has ended. The colonial theory examines the ongoing impact of colonialism and imperialism on the different facets of societal culture, identity, and power dynamics. African epistemologies. I think this from Professor Oyewumi and it's from China TV. The travelers with a closed mind can tell us little about ourselves. Travelers, they can tell us very little about ourselves. We need to define Africa epistemology as the study of knowledge from an African perspective. This is understood as the perspective of an individual African scholar rooted in historical and cultural consciousness. If the person is not so an African, the fact that you're an African scholar does not mean that you are proceeding African epistemology. But for you to be able to produce African epistemology, you must be rooted in historical and cultural consciousness, or those of various African communities, or experts in those communities. So it's not only Africans, there are people that are not Africans that produce African epistemology. And Africa is grouped into three. We have ethno-epistemology, analytic African epistemology, and narrative African epistemology. Ethno-epistemology is study of knowledge from the perspective of a particular African communities, as reviewed with their cultural heritage, their proverbs, their folklore, their traditions and practices. He examines how different African cultures understand and create knowledge. Analytic African epistemology involves philosophical study of concepts such as knowledge, justification, belief, gender, from the African perspective, and just as the name suggests, entails a critical examination of the undervaluation and neglect of African knowledge and voices in global knowledge economies. Okay, that is job, Professor. But some of us that don't know Professor Oyewumi, that's our job. So Oyewumi on African epistemologies and decolonialities. With regard, and I just like this, I've just picked some of our words there. So with regard to African studies, the most important question under consideration turned out on the issue of cultural imperialism, the dominance of West in the production of knowledge. So the agenda was created in Yoruba society through the intertwined process of colonial rule in Nigeria, this translation of Yoruba into English, and the continuing dominance of Western knowledge production. And when the colonial masters came and started having school, the first set of schools were just created. So the first people that went to school were actually them. So once they were writing and they were trying to write all those things, like I read something on Samuel Johnson, and some of those writing some of those things, it's not, they just assume that all those people, like they're laughing. I was telling someone that I was surprised, I'm still surprised that on your that produced an analysis said this or me there was a woman laughing. But because those names are not gendered, it's difficult. So this that system produced an laughing. Then what happened? So I those men and they were right, they just assume. So once you see a name, you just assume that it should be men that do. So in translation that most of us are asking, most oral traditions have been gendered. Their transitions have been translated, even where almost they are put man there. But until recently, it's not that we see he and she. Initially, just there. So Oyewumi study of ancient Oyo show that the principle that determines social organization was seniority, which was based on chronological age. This was also shared by the University of Manchester. And here I had an experience in that to be right of an Italian man. And it was court case, and it was something that his own father had given to him. I said when it was his grandmother. He said because his grandmother was the eldest. The woman does that one because they could not, all the brothers, they cannot question their idea. So the woman gave out the land, of course, become a court case now, years later. But at that time, they couldn't question, the man said, he said they could not question the grandmother, what she was doing. So he found that seniority was not necessarily by a woman or by a man. And I'm sure that was what led into when we go have an Allah that was a woman, when we go have an Omi that was a woman. So in Yoruba land, another one of the said, people of the same woman, you have the strongest bonds than women. So mother rights. So when we say women were marginalized, but in Yoruba, I said that women have a lot of rights. Like I was telling someone that in Remo, there's a matriarchal burial system. And in that system, when a person dies, the siblings of that dead person, the siblings from his mother's side, they are compelled to have a meeting where they contribute towards the burial. the Oba, those are the ones that find shared the same father. They can give, but they are not compelled. So we can, so that means and something that Rodney has said, that mother right was strong in our traditional African society. So social relations determine that there's some social facts and not from biology, not the fact that because you are a woman, because you are a man. I'll just show you a bit of this one. The very popular one, the next slide, the invention of women. That's like the masterpiece, and I don't know if you have not read it, just take time to read it. Then I did that gender epistemologies in Nigeria. They say, what are the discussions in African epistemology concerning Europe? The first one, the nuclear family. And because when you look at gender, when they are say father, mother, was the Africans, the traditional African family did not work with that nuclear family. So by using that nuclear family as a mode of looking at gender as something that has affected us, then Christianity is usually made gender. Then that's an extended family gender. That's the way I find extended family. There's really like all of them, they are from the same household, and the concept and what you say is the most senior. White country calls everybody there, a mommy, she calls them Okomi. And Oko, like the other person has said, Oko does not necessarily mean husband. Oko is like Okomi, senior, or Okomi can just be like a dear one. They call all the women in the house Okomi. It's like, remember, so Okomi to be Okomi, my husband has spoken, but we are not a family. So then I looked at something there, just feminism. And someone said feminism, those are the things that feminism encompasses a variety of stories and movements that promote gender. But of course, there are different types of feminism, Western feminism, black feminism, and feminism. The mainstream feminism and focuses on achieving gender equality through political and legal reforms within a society. The feminists and those who partially discusses that male dominance has always been there are merely assumptions. That is what one professor did that these things are not there, these things are just merely assumptions. Because it existed in the West does not mean that it exists in Africa. So they are just merely set, and we must get uncritical feminist account based on Western historical construction of gender to uphold our history and values of non-gender categories and social relations. Historical feminism in decolonizing the intellectual and the Portuguese, Yoruba scholarship and male dominance. Oyewumi opines that this translation of Yoruba life into English inevitably results in what one might call an ode, you know what ode is, praise patriarchy. As various Yoruba writers and intellectuals write male dominance into social categories, historical events, and translation of oral traditions. So we're trying to so when we look at feminism, let's not just at all these things that women are marginalized. It's not something. It's historical because it came at the point of colonialism. Thanks for your the next slide. Said historical feminism asserts that male dominance, which is universal today, came into being in different places at particular points in time. So what are the things that show that the importance of language? Let's look at our language. We want to produce an African epistemology. Let's look at our language. Let's look at our culture. Let's understand that male dominance and prevailing of Western education. Male that they were one that is the first writers of African history. And Professor Bolani, when she wanted to write that African women, it took her a lot of people tried to not even publish anything about women. So and those are the colonial cases of racialization, male dominance, and gender discrimination. In conclusion, Oyewumi's work has shown that African study was from the day. It is by studying the cultures, languages of Africa that we can produce knowledge that is true Africa. Our work fits into the thesis and intellectual studies that make of African epistemology. It fits in ethno-African ethno-epistemology, analytic African epistemology, and narrative African epistemology. In addition, the work has shown continue, so that the thing that we must continue. We must continue to study our language, we must study our culture, we must begin to look at our indigenous knowledge systems. And what are the things that we must continue in African studies? We must stop following the knowledge of the West. We must not accept what the epistemologies of the West as discourse. We must study ourselves, study our culture, study our languages. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you to all our presenters for your insightful presentation. So I think we have some time for questions and answer. And so I would like to open the discussion by returning to one of the central provocations raised by Professor Oyewumi, and that is, I mean, quite a number of the presenters touched on that, and that is that gender, as we understand it in the Western framework, is not always a foundational organizing principle within the African context. So given that each of your papers engages with gendered experiences, whether through legal archives, proverbs, political movements, and or contemporary feminist discourses. So I would like to invite all the presenters, to reflect on this question. So how do your sources, how do they either affirm, challenge, or complicate Oyewumi's thesis, about the non-centrality of gender in certain African worldviews, and what implications does this, have for how we write, or and what implications does it have for how we write, as well as theorize, African histories moving forward? Who wants to go first?
Let's go. Okay. Mrs. Akonde, please can go ahead with us. Mrs. Akonde.
The question is really like, can you explain, like, kind of long and really get question?
Okay, I mean, your presentations at talked about, I mean, you for your topics or presentations, you used quite a number of sources to talk about gendered experiences. Either I mean, I remember proverbs. You talked about political movements, and some also touched on contemporary feminist discourses. So how do these sources that you have used in your different presentations, how do they either they affirm, or either they challenge or complicate Professor Oyewumi's thesis about the non-centrality of gender in certain African worldviews?
Okay. So okay. Yes. My looking at oral traditions and the things that, for example, or looking at oral traditions and what Professor Oyewumi has done. And like we're going to do oral tradition. So what are that kind of has corroborated by work? In the sense that initially, before reaching the women of women, I had assumed that all those things about gender, different feminism, and I was taking them like they were just theories, and I wasn't thinking outside the box. But when I read the invention of women, I started to think, these things are true, these things are true. So reading our work, and I started looking at the oral traditions around. In fact, the Omoya was, I remember like there was that moment I said, this is like this when we were, I said, come on, I meet you one day, and they come outside. So I've never really talked about mother rights as it's so strong like that. And I now remember this song like this. Omoya, Omoya, Dumi, Omoya, Dumi, Of course, what I'm saying is that I've never looked at that song. I thought that is something that was African knowledge. It's something that we talk about women, of women in modern rights, but by just reading our own work and looking at the oral traditions, the sayings around me, looking at some of the experiences I've had as a child, some of the things I've seen my grandparents, I've seen people, I've seen them, I've experienced, those things became my life. And I now felt like, oh, yes, can you these things are history? It's not only ask to understand all this Western stuff. You only know to produce African history that is genuine. African history that is genuine is to derive, is to look at our culture, to look at our language, to look at our lived experiences. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry, ma'am. It is very little of our hands.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much, Oyeronke, for that awesome question. Coincidentally, during my field work, this is actually a postdoctoral research for me. So I engage with a lot of women who are currently part of the IPOP movement. And funny enough, some of them do not also recognize their engagement as forms of political participation. And so they see themselves as supporting their men in achieving the Biafra dream. And so I actually framed that as a form of internalized patriarchy, that these women have actually seen themselves in a way that they no longer believe that they are actually active or vocal voices in the movement. And another thing that supports this was that many of the women I engaged with were actually older women who had experienced the Biafra War. So they are women in their 60s, in their 70s. And so naturally, it comes to them that they have to be people that need to support their men. And so now, in the conversations that revolves around IPOP, we hear about Nnamdi Kanu, we hear about Simon Ekpa and how they have been very vocal in the questions that revolves around the Biafra agitations. But now the women see themselves as supporters, because when we talk about political science, so I'm looking at it from a political perspective. So when we look at politics, we are looking at it more as people who need to hold political positions. And now, within our context, the people who really hold these political positions are men. We rarely find women holding these political positions, right? And so these women have accepted their fate that they need to actually take up the support roles. So what I am doing in my research is moving beyond seeing themselves as supporters. I'm trying to expand now what we mean by political participation. So I'm not trying to engage the question of patriarchy and institutional maybe limitations of the women. Rather, I'm trying to engage with Professor Oyeronke's scholarship in the sense that I'm trying to debunk what we mean by political participation, because what we define as political participation is more or less seen from the Eurocentric framework, whereby people have to hold political positions before we say they are participating in it. What this everyday activities can
Thank you. I think having some connection. So I can't see the whole setting, but I don't know if there's anyone that can help with coordinating questions from the audience on the ground.
So good afternoon, everyone. Good evening. Do you have any questions now? Questions for the 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Good evening, now. So we have 4 questions in the house. Should we start with one?
Yes, please.
Right,
yes, please. Go ahead. Thank you.
My name is Lanyola Tubo. My question goes to the last center, talking about Allah for the female. I want to be educated. The last woman, she got to that position as a woman or as a woman turned
Okay, did she get to that position as a woman turned man?
Yes, or which of the two?
Well, as the woman turned boy, this guy said she was 30. So at that time, they were doing like gender transition. So she could have dressed like a man. And not she could have dressed, but there was no, she did not become a man. She was still a man.
Sorry, let me provide this information. I'm from Go, where what it was for Allah from the places. The woman turned to the man.
Okay, fine.
So when it got to our lineage, there was not any man to ascend the throne. She knows that at time, what we call it now? Not body parts, not to the male. The fact I see here, look, I can give you addresses, I can give you the name of the custodian of the Igbo, you can consult. You know, for that matter. Yes.
Okay. Then I'm sorry, I'm going to ask like not to say forward. Is that are you also aware that there was an need that was
You know, I'm talking about
I'm just trying
the one that I know is the one.
So yes, but there was an need that there was an need and
Excuse me, please, can we keep the questions, the questions and response brief so we have, more time for other people to ask questions. And I'm sorry, before I open the floor, more broadly, I should have done this. I want to take a moment to acknowledge that we are, incredibly, fortunate to have Professor Oyewumi Oyeronke with us today. I learned that she's on ground. So, Professor, if you are willing, we would be honored to hear any thoughts or reflection you might have, whether in response to the presentations or on how, your work continues to be engaged, interpreted, or even, challenging contemporary scholarship. Thank you.
Yes, please. My name is Emmanuel Fuasia, and my question is directed to all the participants. Well done. And to keep to time, I want to ask, nearly all of us here will claim to be Christians or Muslims and will seem to be okay with the idea that God is male. At what point in our traditional religious cultures did Olodumare become a man? At what point did Chukwu, great spirits, turn to a man? Why are we comfortable still addressing this, our own indigenous God, as man, when we know that there's no evidence for who has seen God? And why can't God be made female? So please, I want you to reflect on it.
All right, thank you. Next question.
So who's number three? Number three is over there. Okay.
Number three. See your question.
Okay. Now, my question is second. Now, when we are talking about the philosophy of contrarians. Now, yes, and the first spectrum. The Romans were the story of yes, no. Perspectives. I mentioned on Africa, the analysis of the nationalities. Now, that is the connection between that and actually almost 1981 work on alignment. Yes,
there is a connection. Because when we are talking about the concept of Omonia, what is actually connotes is collectivity, oneness, togetherness. That is to say, what belongs to you belongs to me. And I care for you. Whatever happens to you, I want you back. Then I believe that I should, like, there is this verb that expresses it all. Because while you are crying, you see because coming out, issuing from your nostrils. So that is the concept, the idea of Omoya. That is to say, Alajobi, one Jobi Wani. We are born together in a way. That doesn't imply that, okay, we came into the world same day. No, but it implies that we belong to one another in virtually everything.
Thank you. So, please, the next one, we will come back to that.
Okay, thank you very much. All the presenters, thank you for your presentation. I have two questions, and I don't think you will be available to respond to me, but I'm glad that Professor Oyewumi is in the room. I wanted to ask about what were the things that informed most of our writing. Let me put it that way, because when Oyewumi was writing many of these things that we are reading now and we're so proud of, she was writing on another lane, which was not a popular lane. The popular lane was this gender binary and that on and on. But she came from a different angle. And that could mean many things. It could mean that she won't easily get a publisher. It could be that she won't easily get published in journals because she was writing something that was off mainstream. So what was that experience like to her? And what can we learn from that? Because some of us we're like that. We shake tables. We write things that people say, what country? Where are you coming from? And so what do you want to say what was your experience like on that? The second one is personal, but is also scholarly. And that's about the Oyeronke thing. If Oyewumi was writing about the erroneous views that we have carried about families, and that African families are not nuclear families in the original sense of it. If she was writing about the extended family as a typical African family, then you cannot query her use of Omoya and the interest she has had in Omoya. And here's my question. Does it not mean that since we have extended families, we cannot lay as much blame on our fathers as much as we will lay on our mothers? So that's why we tend to lean towards Omoya and not Omobaba. Remember the proverb, Omoya iya, Omobaba niba. So was that our experience? Because I know she's also from, an extended family. And then sometimes when we write, we're writing from our lived experiences. So I would like her to make some comments on that. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to say something at the end, because I need to acknowledge all this wonderful work. So after the questions, I'm going to say something. I'll get the end of that.
One more question. My name is Oyewumi. I want to react to abstracts. Your abstracts, your first thing is I'm not that comfortable. You said colonialism in Africa altered history. That means that's the social. And again, we're analyzing the methodology. We are making you a sample of you say extended family, local family. Now we use some extended. My personal is extended. I want to ask people that is certain parts of African epistemology
that was constructed in your assessment of Oyewumi source that was essentially a class of culture, foreign culture, place of culture.
Okay. Our response in the last one, the slide actually said distortions. So that means that Christianity, I'm not saying that Christianity is part of African history. I'm saying that the whole of those factors are all distortions.
All distortions.
Please look at it like distortions in African history.
Talking about
Yes, the colonization in Africa. What are that history? What's that? Okay, complicity with strong. Okay, that's okay. Colonization in Africa, what are the history partially? Please, I didn't get that.
I said, colonizing in Africa, altered history. Colonizing altered Africa's history.
Okay, so noted.
Yeah, thank you.
No, that's very interesting concept of participation. No, in what sense are you saying that the phrase participation? Because after empirics now, participation as far as women are concerned can be examined and obtained political mobilizers. From the angle of being from the angle of holding political positions, from the angle of being candidates based on their reporting on. Because political participation as a cause is an umbrella concept. Now, holding political positions by women does not exhaust the concept as well as the conception of political participation.
We are struggling, for those of us online, we are struggling to hear what's going on ground. We can't hear what's going on ground. We can hardly hear the questions. Yeah, it's very hard to hear. We are...
A minute, please. A minute.
So can you raise the question again?
Yeah. Okay. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes.
The concept of political participation, as far as women are concerned, can be examined from 4 basic perspectives. So I'm asking, which of them are they talking about? Is it women as political mobilizers, women as political candidates, women as voters, or women as holders of political positions? Now, from what I gathered from what they were saying, I could see that they are trying to exhaust the concept of political position from the angle of what? Holding political positions. And I'm now saying that holding political position by women does not exhaust the concept as well as the conception of political participation.
Okay, thank you for that question. It raises some important, very important points. And I'm not sure which speaker that is directed to, but I think
it's actually a suggestion, it's a comment, not a
okay, it's a comment.
Yeah,
okay, it's a comment.
Talking about
okay.
its observation.
Okay, thank you. So any other question on ground?
None.
Maybe one. And that will go to the person for talking about epistemology and African epistemology. I'm curious, why are you using ethno in that context? Why do you have ethno epistemology and you also have African epistemology?
Okay, so like African ethno-Africans. What ethno-African epistemology studies the perspective of particular African communities. It's not like our own work now. looks at gender in Yoruba. She looks at that Yoruba is a social category, like gender is not a social category. So that's helpful because you can that particular way. Then when it comes to analytics, she's analyzing, looking at with the concept of gender and with the concept of respect. So then there are many things what is the way forward? That's why I put historical is that the best way to get history of the African epistemologies to look at. So let's start studying our language, our culture. That's where we are going to get the correct perspective, the correct epistemology to go now.
Thank you.
All right.
Does have any questions?
No, that's all for now.
That's all.
That's all for now.
Okay. I'm not sure if Professor wants to talk to us, address us, or respond to some of the. Because I think I heard.
Yes. Yes, she wants
Yes,
to
ma'am.
talk to us.
Well, it's an honor to be here. That's why I came, and I thank you all for the work that you're doing, and keep doing it. Thank you. With critical minds, and the critical of Oyewumi too, because I've passed on the baton, and I want you to take it to the next level. Okay? So I appreciate that. There are many things I could say. Your questions were very eloquent, and I'll address them last. There are many things I could say. But short of giving me a whole lecture about the presentations, like this angle and that angle, don't have time for that. But I think that over time, looking back and looking forward, the advice I'm going to give is going to be about the constitution of knowledge and the production of knowledge. There's a lot of fake news, fake knowledge, and we have to recognize the moment we're in. Colonial or post-colonial, all of us have imbibed and internalized a lot of negative things about Africa. We have imbibed a lot of values from Western culture. That is our training. And we must always bear that in mind. When we then hear somebody reinterpreting your history, or the history of the Biblia 2,000 years ago, and using the lens of now. To talk about history, we just have to laugh. Because I've heard this whole thing about the Oyeronke, who was said to be female Alaafin. And people say, oh, she did transgender, she went through transgender. It's so ridiculous that this is news. This is evidence from sharing WhatsApp and TikTok. What I want to say is that we must remember that at this moment in time, one of the major problems I have with writings and studies of African culture and history is that we're rewriting the past in the language of science. So whenever you have people challenging gender or whatever, they're using the Bible, they're using the Quran, they're using their current experiences, and they are, as the person who presented on judges said, if the only judges or the only politicians we know in the last 80 or 100 years are male, why does it surprise us? And people have this notion that they have to almost fight over these things. Because who are the beneficiaries? Who were the beneficiaries of the colonial system? I wrote about that. It was the men. It was the men. And they held and continue to hold on tight to it in the name of culture. And I don't really get into arguments of culture. I don't get into arguments of religion. I remember
maybe the second LSA, they devoted it to my books and people discussed it. I don't get into all that, especially when we're talking about social change, especially when we want to transform society. The question I like to put on the table is this: what sorts of society do we want to live in now? Do you want a society in which your daughter is married off at the age of 12? Do you want a society? That is what we should put forward. And what then are the resources that we can bring into realizing those possibilities? What are the resources that are available wherever they are available to transform society, to give us the kind of society? Because right now, things are not okay. Things are not okay. And that's where we need to be. With all sorts of things and order. And what is interesting to me, I see it when we talk about gender, I see it when we talk about particular aspects of our history. People will think that, okay, because I'm from this place, I'm the expert on it. How come? Because everybody is a woman, or we have male and female, they are all experts. No, that's not how it works. People must think of evidence, the kind of research that is done, and how we came to certain conclusions. And what I want to say about my work, especially the Convention of Women, which was my dissertation, by the way. I had professors, I met a Ghanaian professor, in fact, he was vice chancellor. When he first met me, he said, "That's you. You were so bold." He said, "That was my dissertation." He said, "But that's the problem. You were so bold." And I always say I was bold out of ignorance. I was bold out of ignorance. And I always say the book wrote me. I wasn't going to give an inch. Unfortunately, at that time, I didn't know all these professors. But once you get to know people, I guess once you have been longer, the system, right? The system transforms you and it takes you over. And that's one thing one must be conscious and one must guard against. So, in response to your question, I met all sorts of challenges. I was invited to a conference at the University of California, and some feminists walked me out of the room when I was finishing my. This particular professor, we became friends later on. She said that we're busy telling the world and everybody how gender is such an important concept and category and the way it shapes our reality. And you come and say that this is gender and you know, they wanted to walk out of the room, but I stopped them and said that, you know what? One of the things that you're talking about, and the big thing then, in the early 80s, is that gender is socially constructed. I said, what my work does is to actually show you how gender is constructed, socially constructed. If anything, it adds to your argument, because I took a step by step how gender is constructed from Yoruba society. They had to let me stay in the room. Those are some of the challenges I faced. And then I really didn't have a supervisor. There was nobody on like the invitation committee that was an Africanist or an African. Even when the book came to the University of Minnesota Press, the 4 issues refused it. None of them was an Africanist. And all of them said, publish, 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 except one person who thought my first chapter was too radical. I said, that's propaganda. And I don't know whether you know this chapter because it's not in the book. Okay. Wow. I have a chapter, White Woman's Birth. in my book, African Women and Feminism and Anthropology. That's the first chapter of my dissertation, but it didn't enter the book because one of the reviewers said, no, this is propaganda. You talk like this, what. But I'm glad there was that meeting, took me to the other level. Yeah. And so the book is such an important part of the dissertation. And so the person who finally I brought him into being the chair of my dissertation because I was in a department. I never studied African studies. I was in sociology, and if you've heard me say anything before, is that sociology in America is not open to African studies. There's no African sociology. And so those are very things I contended with. And so when I was looking for a job, which was an issue. In fact, I was joking. I said, I have to go sue my department, which was one of the top departments in the country. I paid all this tuition, and when I'm looking for a job, they're looking at me that, okay, when you are studying African. And I insisted on that because I could have been studying race. We were comfortable with race, especially the US race relations. And it contributed to me. So those were some of the ways in which I met challenges. But the chair of my dissertation, God bless him, an African American, the only person I could go to talk to in the sociology department. I remember when I went to his office and said, well, I need a chair. The person who was supposed to chair my dissertation was very unhappy with me and my critique of white women. So she dropped me. So I went into his office and I said, I need a chair. And he does race relations and all that. And said, you have thrown me a curveball. I think that's a baseball term. And I remember when I was relaying to my friend, he said, you have thrown me a curved ball. So somebody said, it shows you don't know baseball. Okay? But I remember he said that, but he was willing to chair my dissertation. And there was an African American scholar, Barbara Christian, who was also willing to share my work. Okay. So he told me that things could be difficult and get difficult, but I should always know that no hegemony is total. Hegemony is a Gramscian term. No hegemony is total. And I always understood it. Is that it's almost as if you are living in a prison. But maybe every 24 hours, every 2 months, the door opens.
I'm sorry to.
And I go through that little opening.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Professor, but I've just been informed that we have 2 minutes to the end of this session.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor. So as we conclude, I want to thank Professor Oyewumi for a wonderful insight. I also want to thank our panelists, for their thoughtful work. And I also want to thank everyone on ground. And so this conversation that we have begun, again, reflects the continuing resonance of Professor Oyewumi's scholarship. And again, the need to center African epistemologies, not just as critique, but as a method and foundation. So I encourage you all to join us for the part 2 of the celebration and also continue the dialogue throughout the conference. Thank you, everyone.